"Please, don't look under the blanket," she begged. Out in the frozen wilderness, a desperate settler woman clutches a tattered wool covering to her chest. But when the giant Apache warrior pulls it back, he doesn't find a weapon. He finds a frail, fevered baby mixed blood, abandoned, and his eyes burst with tears. The campfire flickers. Whispers rise. Some say the woman is a spy. Others see a mother's last prayer. And yet hidden beneath her warning lies a darker truth. Soldiers are coming, with orders to burn everything in their path. One woman, one child, one towering Apache caught between mercy and war. Secrets will be uncovered. Loyalties will be tested. And a single act of compassion could change the fate of two nations. But when the army rides in at dawn, dragging her, and the baby toward judgment, and the Apache lays down his weapon before the crowd, will mercy prevail? Or will hatred crush the only family they have left? Open-ended question. What happens when a plea for secrecy becomes the key to survival? And love is the only weapon strong enough to stop a war. Your reactions reaffirm something simple yet powerful, that stories still shape us, even in silence. If you believe in the soft endurance of love, truth, and doing what's right, then you're exactly why these stories exist. Through the biting mountain winds of late winter 1878, Anna May Walker stumbled forward, her wool blanket drawn tight against the cold. Each step grew heavier than the last as she made her way along the high Colorado Trail. The worn leather of her boots offered little protection against the frozen ground, and her throat burned with each ragged breath of thin mountain air. The bundle against her chest stirred weakly. "Hush now, little one," she whispered, though her own voice trembled. Just a bit further. But even as the words left her lips, black spots danced before her eyes. Her knees buckled beneath her, and the frozen earth rushed up to meet her. The last thing Anna May heard, before consciousness slipped away, was the sharp crack of a twig and startled voices calling out in Apache. She clutched the blanket tighter, trying to shield its precious contents. But her strength had finally given out. Shouts echoed across the hunting camp. Two young braves gestured urgently toward the tree line where the woman had fallen. "Now all, come quickly." The tall Apache warrior emerged from his lodge, his dark eyes scanning the situation with practiced caution. His hand instinctively went to the knife at his belt as he approached the collapsed figure. Years of raids and broken treaties had taught him to be wary of settlers, even ones as seemingly helpless as this. As Nawal drew closer, the woman's eyes fluttered open. Her face was gaunt, cheeks hollow from hunger, and her cracked lips moved in a desperate whisper. "Please," she managed, "don't look under the blanket." Something in her voice, raw fear, mixed with fierce protection, made Nawal pause. He had seen that same look years ago in his own wife's eyes, before the cavalry raid that had taken everything from him. With careful movements, as one might approach a wounded deer, he knelt beside her. "I mean no harm," he said in English, his voice low and steady. The woman's eyes widened slightly at his words, but the fear remained. Gently, with a reverence that surprised even the watching hunters, Nawal lifted one corner of the wool blanket, his breath caught in his throat. Nestled against the woman's chest lay an infant, no more than a few months old. The baby's skin was flushed with fever, its tiny breaths coming in labored gasps. The sight struck him like a physical blow. The child was the same age his son had been when illness had claimed him during that bitter winter after the raid. Tears welled in Nawal's eyes, dropping silently onto the blanket. The watching braves shifted uncomfortably, unused to seeing such naked emotion from their stoic fellow warrior. But Nawal paid them no mind, his attention fixed on the sick child and its desperate mother. "Bring them to my lodge," he commanded. In Apache, his voice rough with emotion. "And fetch Morning Star. The child needs her healing skills." Two young hunters moved to help, but Anna May flinched away from their touch, trying to shield her baby. Nawal held up his hand, stopping them, and spoke to her directly. "Your child is sick. We have a healer who can help. Will you trust us, Anna?" May looked up at him, searching his face. The firelight from the nearby camp caught the tears still glistening in his eyes, and something in her chest loosened slightly. This warrior's grief seemed as raw and real as her own. After everything she'd endured, the shame, the abandonment, the long weeks of desperate travel, perhaps here, finally, was someone who would see her child as more than just a mistake to be hidden away. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. With infinite care, Nawal lifted both mother and child. Anna May was light in his arms, too light. Speaking of many missed meals, he carried them into the camp, where curious faces peered from lodge entrances. The firelight cast dancing shadows across weather-worn faces, and Anna May felt her fear surge again. But when she looked up at Nawal's face, set with quiet determination, she saw something she hadn't dared hope for in months. Compassion. Morning Star. The tribe's elderly healer was already waiting in Nawal's lodge. Her weathered hands moved with gentle efficiency as she examined the feverish infant. She spoke quietly in Apache to Nawal, who translated for Anna May. "She says your little one is strong, like an eagle fighting the storm winds. But the fever must be brought down." The old woman began mixing herbs in a small clay bowl. Her movements sure and practiced. Anna May watched every move with desperate attention, her hand never leaving her baby's small chest, feeling each labored breath. The terror that had been her constant companion these past months was still there. But now it shared space with something else, that first faint flicker of hope. As fragile and precious as the infant's pulse beneath her palm, as Morning Star. Worked Nawal brought a cup of warm broth to Anna May. "Drink," he said simply. When she hesitated, he added, "Your child needs you strong." The broth was rich and warming, and Anna May couldn't remember the last time she'd tasted anything so good. As she sipped, Nawal settled nearby, his presence both watchful and reassuring. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the grief and kindness etched therein equal measure. Outside, the wind continued to moan through the mountain pines. But here in the lodge, wrapped in borrowed blankets with the healer's quiet chants washing over them, Anna May felt the first real warmth she'd known in months. Her baby's breathing seemed easier already, and exhaustion began to claim her. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was Nawal's steady gaze watching over them both, as constant as the mountains themselves. Through the natural breaks in the lodge's covering, the stars wheeled overhead, ancient and unchanging, witnessing this moment of mercy in the vast wilderness. In the camp below, the night fires burned low, casting their protective circle of light against the darkness. While inside the lodge, two wounded souls began their cautious journey from strangers to something more. Inside the wickiup, Anna May lay bundled in soft furs that smelled of wood smoke and sage. The dome-shaped shelter, woven from branches and brush, kept out the bitter mountain wind while allowing the heat from a small fire to warm the space. Morning Star, the elderly healer, moved with quiet purpose around her patients, her silver-streaked hair gleaming in the firelight. The healer pressed a clay cup into Anna May's trembling hands. Steam rose from the dark liquid within, carrying a sharp medicinal scent. "Drink," Morning Star said in halting English, demonstrating with a sipping motion. When Anna May hesitated, the old woman's weathered face creased with gentle insistence. Anna May lifted the cup to her lips. The tea was bitter, but warmth spread through her chest as she swallowed. Her baby stirred against her, and Morning Star immediately turned her attention to the infant. With practiced hands, she applied cool, damp poultices to the child's feverish skin. The baby whimpered at first, then settled as the medicine began to ease the burning heat. Outside the wickiup, voices murmured in Apache, rising and falling like wind through pine needles. Though Anna May couldn't understand the words, the tone of concern and disagreement was clear enough. She caught the word soldiers more than once, and her arms tightened protectively around her child. Morning Star noticed her tension. The healer patted Anna May's hand and spoke soothingly in her own language. Though the words were foreign, the gesture of comfort needed no translation. The old woman's dark eyes held wisdom and kindness that transcended the barrier of language. Beyond the shelter's walls, the camp's evening fires cast dancing shadows against the wickiup sides. The aroma of cooking meat drifted in, making Anna May's empty stomach clench. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal. Naywal sat cross-legged outside the wickiup's entrance, his tall frame a silent guardian in the gathering dusk. As night deepened around him, memories rose unbidden in his mind. He remembered another winter night, years ago, when his son's laughter had filled their lodge. The boy had been learning to walk, tottering between his parents with determined concentration. His wife had caught him each time he stumbled, her dark eyes shining with pride. But then came the day of thundering hooves and sharp commands in English. The day when rifle smoke had turned the air bitter and soldiers' boots had trampled the cooking fires to ash. His family, along with many others, had been cut down in the space of a few brutal moments. Now, listening to the soft sounds of morning Star tending to the settler woman's child, Naywal felt the familiar ache of loss. Yet alongside it stirred something else, a fierce protectiveness he hadn't expected to feel again. This woman and her fever-struck infant had awakened something he'd thought long buried beneath grief and anger. Throughout the night, the camp buzzed with whispered discussions. Some warriors argued that harboring a white woman would surely bring cavalry patrols down upon them. Others, particularly the older members of the tribe, saw deeper meaning in her arrival. They spoke of signs and visions, suggesting the Great Spirit had guided her to their camp for a purpose. Morning Star emerged occasionally to gather fresh herbs or heat more water, each time exchanging quiet words with Naywal. The child's fever remained stubborn, but the healer's medicines were slowly having an effect. Each time the baby's breathing seemed to ease slightly. Naywal noticed the tension in his own shoulders lessening as well, as the first pale light of dawn began to soften the eastern sky. Anna May stirred from her exhausted sleep. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, the unfamiliar shelter, the scent of strange medicines, the sound of Apache voices outside. Then memory rushed back, along with the realization that she and her child were still alive. Morning Star appeared with a wooden bowl of steaming soup made from venison and wild roots. The aroma made Anna May's mouth water, but years of warnings about savage Indians made her hesitate. The healer settled beside her, took a sip from the bowl herself, then offered it again with an encouraging nod. Anna May's hunger finally overcame her fear. She took the bowl with shaking hands and sipped carefully. The soup was rich and satisfying, warming her from the inside out. As she ate, she watched Morning Star check her baby's temperature with gentle touches. The infant's skin felt cooler, and the breathing had grown stronger overnight. Naywal ducked through the wickiup's entrance, bringing fresh water and clean cloths. In the growing daylight, Anna May studied him more carefully. His face bore the same quiet strength she'd noticed the day before, but now she could see the shadows of old pain in his eyes. When he looked at her child, something in his expression shifted, softening into what might have been tenderness. "The fever breaks," he said in his careful English. "Morning Star says your little one fights like a young eagle." Anna May felt tears well up in her eyes. After weeks of desperate flight, of sleeping in barns and abandoned shacks, of trying to keep her baby alive on what little food she could find or beg, She had stumbled into the last place she ever expected to find help. The very people she'd been taught to fear had shown her more kindness in one night than she'd received in months of wandering. Her baby stirred, making small sounds of hunger. Morning Star immediately produced a mixture of herbs and warm water, showing Anna May how to feed it to the child with a scrap of clean cloth. The infant took the medicine eagerly, and Anna May felt hope flutter in her chest as she watched color return to the tiny cheeks as the morning sun filtered through the Wiki-Up's walls. Anna May realized something had shifted inside her. The crushing weight of complete solitude, her constant companion since fleeing the fort in shame, had lifted slightly. Here, surrounded by the quiet activities of the camp and the gentle ministrations of Morning Star, watched over by Noel's steady presence, she was no longer entirely alone. The sound of children's laughter drifted in from outside, along with the smell of breakfast fires and the soft thud of moccasined feet going about morning tasks. Normal sounds, human sounds, so different from the fearful silence of her weeks of hiding. Her baby slept peacefully now, breathing easily for the first time in days. Morning Star hummed softly as she worked, and even Noel's watchful silence felt protective rather than threatening. 2 nights had passed since Anna May's arrival at the Apache camp. The fever had finally released its grip on her baby, whom Morning Star had taken to calling Little Eagle after the child's fierce will to live. The early evening air held the last bite of winter, driving most of the tribe into their Wiki-Ups. But Anna May found herself drawn to the central fire, where Noel sat in contemplation. Her legs still trembled as she lowered herself onto a smooth log across from him. The flames cast flickering shadows across his strong features as he acknowledged her with a slight nod. For several moments they sat in silence, broken only by the crack and pop of burning wood. "I owe you truth," Anna May finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. She clutched her blanket tighter, more for courage than warmth. "About why I came." Noel's dark eyes settled on her face, patient and steady. "Speak then," he said simply. Anna May drew a shaky breath. "I met a cavalry officer at Fort Richardson last spring. He spoke kind words, made promises." Her fingers twisted in the blanket's wool. "When I found I was with child, he seemed pleased at first. But when the baby came, her voice caught. The child favored its father's blood," Nawal observed quietly. Yes, tears slid down Anna May's cheeks. The moment he saw the baby's copper skin, he turned away, denied everything. Said I must have. She couldn't finish the cruel accusation. Nawal's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. The other officers' wives whispered. The soldiers made jokes. I could have endured it, maybe for the baby's sake. But then I heard something that made me run. She leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. The soldiers were planning a raid on your camp. They mean to attack before the spring thaw, when the snow still hampers movement. The stillness that followed her words was absolute. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Awal's face had gone rigid, his eyes reflecting both firelight and something darker. Memories of past raids, past losses. You are certain of this? He asked, each word carefully measured. I heard them myself. They spoke freely, never thinking a disgraced woman would carry such news to their enemies. Anna May's hands trembled. I couldn't let them hurt more innocent people. Not when my own child carries both bloods. An elder emerged from the shadows, followed by several others who had been listening. Soon, a circle of concerned faces surrounded the fire. Angry voices rose in Apache, some pointing at Anna May with suspicious gestures. She could be a spy, one warrior spat in English, ensuring she understood the accusation. Sent to gain our trust with a false warning. What spy brings a dying infant? Morning Star countered, appearing at Anime's side like a protective shadow. What spy nearly dies herself in the snow? The debate grew fiercer. Some elders gestured toward the mountains, arguing about defense positions. Others shook their heads, suggesting the entire camp should move immediately. A few continued to cast distrustful glances at Anime, their hands straying toward weapon hilts. Through it all, Naewol remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the flames as if seeking wisdom in their dance. The arguing voices rose to a crescendo until he finally stood, his impressive height silencing the circle. "The Creator works in ways we cannot always understand," he said, his deep voice carrying authority without need for volume. "Sometimes, the most broken vessel carries the purest water." He turned to face Anime directly. "You risked everything to bring this warning. Your child could have died. You could have died. Yet you came." "I had to," she whispered. "How could I live, knowing I might have prevented more death?" Naewol nodded slowly. "Truth speaks with its own voice. I hear it in yours." He addressed the circle of faces. "We will not waste this gift of warning arguing about the giver's heart. We will act." The tension in the circle began to ease. Even those who had been most suspicious seemed to accept Naewol's judgment. The discussion turned to practical matters, which passes to watch. Where to move the women and children, how to prepare defenses. Anime sat quietly, relief and exhaustion washing over her in equal measure. Morningstar pressed a cup of tea into her hands, and she sipped it gratefully, watching as the tribe began to mobilize with practiced efficiency. Years of survival had taught them to move quickly when danger threatened. Naewol returned to his seat across the fire from her. "You have given us chance to save many lives," he said softly. "But you have lost much to bring this warning." "Lost everything long before I came here," Anime admitted. "My family disowned me when I married in haste. The fort rejected me when my baby's heritage showed. I have no home left to lose." "Perhaps," Naewol replied, his eyes holding hers across the flames. "The Creator guided you here not only to save us, but so we might save each other." The fire crackled between them, and Anime felt something shift in her heart, a sense that perhaps, losing everything, she had found exactly where she needed to be. Dawn broke over the Apache camp in pale ribbons of gold and rose. Anime woke early, her muscles still aching from her ordeal, but her spirit determined. She knew that warnings alone would not build trust. Actions must speak louder than words. After nursing Little Eagle and settling him in a cradle board borrowed from Morningstar, Anime approached a group of women grinding corn near the central cooking fire. Their rhythmic movements with stone matats created a steady percussion that echoed through the crisp morning air. "May I help?" she asked softly, gesturing toward the work. The women exchanged glances. Then one of them, her hair streaked with gray, nodded and shifted aside. She demonstrated the proper motion, her weathered hands moving the grinding stone with practiced efficiency. Anime knelt and took up a stone. But her first attempts were clumsy. The corn kernels scattered instead of grinding smoothly. Several children watching from nearby giggled at her awkwardness, their bright eyes twinkling with mischief. "Like this," the older woman said, adjusting Anime's grip and showing her how to rock the stone rather than push it. "Let the weight do the work." From across the camp, Naewol observed the scene while preparing his hunting gear. His dark eyes softened as he watched Anime persist despite her obvious frustration. When she finally managed to establish a proper rhythm, the approving nods from the other women brought a faint smile to his face. As the morning wore on, Anime moved to help with water gathering. She struggled with the heavy clay vessels unused to balancing them on her hip as the Apache women did so gracefully. The path to the stream was steep and rocky, making each step treacherous. "Here," a young mother named Singing Brook said, steadying Anna Mae's elbow when she stumbled. "Small steps, like dancing. The water shows you how to move." By her third trip, Anna Mae had begun to find the rhythm of it. Her arms trembled with exhaustion, but pride straightened her spine. Each successful journey with a full water vessel earned her more approving glances from the tribe. In the afternoon, Morning Star invited her to join a circle of women repairing winter hides. Anna Mae's experience with needlework proved useful here, though the bone needles and sinew thread were different from her familiar steel and cotton. She demonstrated a sturdy stitch she had learned from her grandmother, and the women leaned in with interest. Strong binding, Morning Star commented, examining Anna Mae's work. Good for moccasins. Through the day, Nawal kept a watchful distance. He intercepted suspicious glances from a few warriors with stern looks of his own, silently asserting his protection of the pale woman and her child. When Little Eagle woke crying, Nawal made sure fresh broth was brought to Anna Mae so she could keep up her strength for nursing. As evening approached and the work circles broke up, Anna Mae's hands were raw and her back ached fiercely. Yet, satisfaction warmed her chest as she settled by the main fire, cradling Little Eagle. Without conscious thought, she began to hum a hymn her mother had sung to her in childhood, Amazing Grace. The familiar melody flowed from her throat, cracked from exhaustion, but clear in its devotion. Though the words were different from their own songs, the Apache women recognized the spirit of a mother's love in the tune. Several paused in their evening tasks to listen. The song speaks of mercy. Nawal asked quietly, settling nearby with a piece of wood he was carving. Anna Mae nodded. Of being lost, then found. Of grace that carries us through our darkest hours. She stroked Little Eagle's soft black hair. My mama sang it to me when I was scared or sick. As if on cue, Little Eagle began to fuss, his small face scrunching up as fever once again heated his skin. Anna Mae's arms trembled with fatigue as she tried to rock him, her day's labor taking its toll. Without a word, Nawal set aside his carving and held out his hands. Anna Mae hesitated only a moment before, carefully transferring her son to his broad chest. Little Eagle looked tiny against the warrior's frame, but Nawal handled him with extraordinary gentleness, rising smoothly. Nawal began to pace the fire's perimeter, his steps forming a slow, swaying dance. He hummed deep in his chest, not Anna Mae's hymn, but an Apache melody that rumbled soothingly through Little Eagle's small body. Gradually, the baby's fussing quieted to peaceful breaths. Around the fire, Anna Mae noticed the expressions of the tribe softening as they watched their fierce warrior tenderly comforting a mixed-blood child. Even those who had been most suspicious seemed to recognize the simple truth before them: a baby in need of care, a mother doing her best to provide it, and a man whose heart was big enough to embrace them both. Morning Star touched Anna Mae's shoulder and pressed a cup of healing tea into her hands. "Drink," she instructed. "Tomorrow there is more work, and you must be strong." The words carried acceptance, an acknowledgement that Anna Mae had earned her place among them through this day's labor. She sipped the bitter tea gratefully, watching. As Nawal continued his gentle pacing with her son, Little Eagle's tiny hand curled around one of Nawal's fingers, and the warrior's face softened in a way that made Anna Mae's heart ache. In that moment, she saw not a fearsome Apache warrior, but simply a man who had known love and loss, who understood the precious weight of a child in his arms. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks toward the darkening sky. Around its warmth, the tribe settled into their evening routines, women mending, children playing quiet games, men discussing plans for tomorrow's hunt. And through it all, Nawal paced with the baby, his low humming a counterpoint to the night sounds of the camp. Anna Mae found herself folded into the scene as if she had always been there, her presence no longer causing ripples of unease. She had not erased all doubt in a single day, but she had begun to weave herself into the fabric of their community, one grinding stone, one water vessel, one careful stitch at a time. The winter storm arrived with fierce determination, blanketing the Colorado highlands in deep drifts of snow. Within days, the hunting camp found itself surrounded by white walls that made travel impossible. The scattered pines groaned under their frozen burden, and icy winds whistled through the wickiups despite their careful construction. Anna May woke to find frost patterns decorating the inside of her shelter. Little Eagle, bundled tight against her chest, fussed in his sleep as his fever continued its relentless grip. The camp's firewood supplies were dwindling faster than expected in the bitter cold. "We must gather more wood while the storm gives us peace," Nawal announced that morning, his breath visible in the frigid air. His dark eyes found Anna May. "Will you help? Many hands make the work lighter." Anna May nodded, wrapping herself in layers of borrowed furs. She secured Little Eagle to Morningstar's care, touching his warm forehead with worried lips before following Nawal into the forest. The snow reached past her knees in places, making each step a challenge. They worked in comfortable silence, Noel breaking dead branches from the trees, while Anna May gathered smaller pieces from where they poked through the snow. The quiet was broken only by the soft thump of snow falling from branches and their labored breathing in the thin mountain air. "The winter spirits are hungry this year," Nawal said, his voice low as he added another branch to their growing pile. "They devour our warmth. Back home, my mama used to say, 'Harsh winters make for sweet springs.'" Anna May replied, then caught herself. Where was home now? The fort that had rejected her? The settlement that had turned its back? Lost in these thoughts, she stepped onto a hidden patch of ice. Her feet flew out from under her, and she braced for a hard fall, but strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her against a broad chest. She found herself looking up into Nawal's face, closer than they'd ever been. Time seemed to pause. His eyes held depths of understanding that stole her breath more surely than the cold. Here was a man who knew loss as intimately as she did, who carried grief like a familiar companion. Yet in his gaze she also saw strength, compassion, and something warmer that made her heart flutter. The moment broke when a distant wolf howled. Nawal gently set her back on her feet, but his hands lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Watch your step," he said softly. "The ice hides like a snake beneath the snow." They returned to camp. With their arms full of wood, their cheeks flushed from more than just the cold. But Anna May's momentary peace shattered when she heard Little Eagle's weak cries from the wickiup. His fever had spiked again, his small body burning despite the bitter air. Through the long afternoon, she tried every remedy the healer offered. Willow bark tea, cool cloths, prayers whispered into his dark hair. Nothing seemed to help. As evening drew its purple curtain across the sky, Anna May's composure finally broke. "Why, Lord?" she whispered brokenly, rocking her son. "Have you turned your face from us? Was my sin so great that you would punish an innocent child?" Tears froze on her cheeks as she clutched Little Eagle closer. Nawal, who had been keeping watch nearby, moved to sit beside her at the fire. "The Great Spirit does not punish children for their parents' choices," he said firmly. "Nor does he abandon any of his creatures, no matter how far they wander." "How can you be so sure?" Anna May asked, her voice raw with fear and exhaustion. "Look at the eagles," Nawal replied, gesturing to the sky where the great birds sometimes wheeled above. "The camp. They face the fiercest storms, yet the Great Spirit guides them to shelter. Their young cry out in hunger, and He leads them to food. Even in the deepest winter, they soar free." Anna May considered this, remembering verses from her own faith. "In the Bible, God says He watches over every sparrow that falls," she said slowly. that his children are worth more than many sparrows. Different words, same truth. Nawal nodded. Your hymns and our chants, they tell the same story, that we are never forgotten, that mercy flows like a river through all seasons. As if to demonstrate, he began to sing softly, an Apache melody that rose and fell like wind through canyon walls. After a moment, Anna May joined in with amazing grace, their voices weaving together in an unlikely harmony that drew others to the fire. Little Eagle stirred, his cries softening as the blended music washed over him. Nawal reached into his leather pouch and withdrew something he had been carving, a perfect replica of an eagle feather, lovingly shaped from pine wood. Every child needs a true name, he said, carefully tying the carving above the cradle board with a strip of sinew, one that speaks to their spirit. He touched the baby's forehead gently. This one has fought like an eaglet to survive. He will grow strong, and one day he will soar. Let him be called Little Eagle. Anna May touched the carved feather, feeling the smooth grain of the wood beneath her fingers. Little Eagle, she repeated, tasting the name. It felt right, a bridge between two worlds, like the prayers they had shared. Around them, the tribe murmured approval. Morning Star brought fresh tea for both mother and child. Other women added wood to the fire, building it higher against the gathering night. The flames cast dancing shadows on the snow as more voices joined the gentle weave of song. Apache mothers teaching Anna made their melodies while learning the words to her hymns. Little Eagle slept more peacefully now, his breath still quick. With fever, but somehow stronger. The carved feather swayed slightly in the firelight, casting its protective shadow over his small face. Anna May felt something settle in her heart, not quite peace, but hope. Hope as delicate as a carved feather, as strong as an eagle's wing. As enduring as the eternal mercy their different faiths described. The morning dawned crisp and bright, sunlight sparkling off the snow-laden branches. Inside the healer's wickiup, Morning Bird pressed her weathered hand against the Little Eagle's forehead, her eyes closing in concentration. Anna May held her breath, clutching the edge of her borrowed blanket as she waited for the verdict. A slow smile spread across Morning Bird's face. The fever spirit has fled, she announced in halting English, then switched to Apache for the gathering crowd outside. Excited murmurs rippled through the camp. Anna May's shoulders sagged with relief as she gathered Little Eagle into her arms. His skin felt cool for the first time in weeks, and his eyes were clearer, more alert. He even managed a tiny smile when she kissed his forehead. Nawal ducked through the wickiup entrance, his tall frame filling the space. This news calls for celebration, he declared. The Great Spirit has blessed us with a successful hunt yesterday. Tonight, we feast. Throughout the day, the camp buzzed with preparation. Women scraped and prepared the deer meat while children gathered extra firewood. Anna May watched in fascination as the hunters constructed a roasting frame from green wood, suspending strips of venison over carefully tended flames. The aroma of roasting meat filled the air as the sun began its descent. People gathered around the central fire, passing wooden bowls filled with tender venison and dried berries reconstituted in broth. Anna May sat cross-legged on a buffalo robe, savoring each bite. After weeks of worry and sparse eating, the food tasted like heaven itself. Nawal approached, his arms outstretched. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to Little Eagle. Anna May nodded, carefully transferring her son to his strong embrace. The contrast was striking, the tiny infant cradled against the warrior's broad chest. Yet Nawal handled him with extraordinary gentleness, humming a soft melody as he swayed. Little Eagle cooed, reaching up to pat Noel's chin with his tiny hand. The sound of Anna May's laughter rang out, surprising even herself. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed so freely. The sound drew happy glances from around the fire. "Look how natural he is with the baby," Morning Star teased in. Apache nudging Anna May with her elbow. Like a father already. Other women joined in the gentle teasing, making knowing glances between Nawal and Anna May. Anna May felt her cheeks grow warm, but she couldn't deny the flutter in her heart. As she watched Nawal with her son, he had taken to calling Little Eagle Amaz his little eagle, with such natural affection that it made her throat tight with emotion. As evening deepened into night, more people added their voices to the celebration. Apache songs mixed with the crackling of the fire and the distant cry of coyotes. Anna May even shared a hymn, her voice stronger now than it had been weeks ago. The tribe had learned to hum along with certain parts, creating a harmony that bridged their different worlds. Later, as the celebration wound down and families began retiring to their wickiups, Anna May found herself walking with Nawal under a vast blanket of stars. Little Eagle slept peacefully in his cradle board, secured to her back. The night was cold, but clear, with the Milky Way stretching like a river of light across the sky. They stopped at the edge of the camp, where the firelight faded into darkness. Anna May turned to face the man who had changed everything for her, and her son. "I never properly thanked you," she said softly, "for that first day when you found us in the snow. You could have turned us away. Most would have." Nawal was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the stars. "When I saw your son that day, something broke open inside me," he admitted. "I lost my family to the soldiers' guns 3 winters ago. My son was not much older than Little Eagle. He touched the carved feather hanging from the cradle board. I thought my heart would stay frozen forever, but this little one, he saved me first. He reminded me that life continues, that love is stronger than loss." The honesty in his voice moved her deeply. Without thinking, Anna May reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough from work and warfare, but they closed gently around hers with infinite care. They stood together in comfortable silence, their joined hands saying more than words could express. The bond between them had grown so gradually, so naturally that Anna May couldn't pinpoint when her gratitude had deepened into something more. She only knew that when Nawal looked at her, she felt seen, not as a fallen woman or a burden, but as herself. When he held Little Eagle, she saw the father her son deserved. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibility. Finally, Nawal squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "The night grows cold," he said. "You should rest. Little Eagle will need his strength to grow into his name." Anna May nodded, suddenly shy again. "Thank you for the feast," she said. "For everything." "Sleep well, Anna May," he replied, using her name with a gentleness that made it sound like poetry. She walked back to her wickiup, aware of his protective gaze following her path. Inside, as she settled Little Eagle into his cradle board, she touched the carved feather and offered a prayer of gratitude for her son's healing, for the tribe's acceptance, and for the warrior whose compassion had saved them. Both in more ways than one. The first warning came with the thundering of hooves, shattering the pre-dawn stillness. 2 Apache scouts burst into camp, their horses lathered and heaving. "Soldiers," they shouted in their native tongue. Coming down the valley, the peaceful night exploded into chaos. Women snatched sleeping children from their beds, while warriors grabbed weapons and rushed to defensive positions. The camp transformed from quiet slumber to frenzied activity in mere heartbeats. Anna May jerked awake at the first shouts, her heart hammering against her ribs. Little Eagle whimpered in his cradle board as she frantically pulled him close. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, accompanied by the metallic jangle of military tack and the sharp commands of officers. Nawal appeared at her wickiup entrance, his face grim. "Come quickly," he urged, reaching for her arm. "We must get you to safety." She scrambled to her feet, clutching Little Eagle to her chest. The baby began to cry, his wails joining the chorus of confusion around them. Nowall guided them toward the back of the camp, where the terrain rose steeply into protective rocks. But they were too late. The cavalry burst through the camp's perimeter like a wave breaking against rocks. Horses reared and snorted, their riders firing weapons into the air. Screams erupted as people scattered in all directions. The sounds of gunfire mixed with the crack of breaking lodgepoles as soldiers drove their mounts through the wickies. There, a soldier's shout cut through the chaos. The white woman, Ataname, felt rough hands seize her arm, yanking her backward. "Tay!" she screamed as Little Eagle was torn from her grasp by another soldier. "No, please. He's my baby." "Tay!" Newall roared, with rage, his powerful frame launching toward the soldiers who held Anime. His fist connected with the first man's jaw, sending him sprawling. A second soldier rushed him, but Nowell's elbow caught him in the throat, dropping him to the ground. "Run!" Nowall shouted to Anime, turning to face more approaching soldiers. But she couldn't move, couldn't leave Little Eagle, who was being passed to a soldier on horseback. "My baby." She screamed again, fighting against the hands that held her. "Please, he's sick. He needs me." More soldiers surrounded Newall, who fought like a man possessed. His fists and feet were everywhere, his skill as a warrior evident in every movement. 2 more soldiers fell before him, but there were too many. Anime saw the rifle butt swing in a vicious arc, catching Newall on the side of his head with a sickening crack. The proud warrior crumpled to the ground, blood streaming down his face. Soldiers quickly bound his hands behind his back, kicking him when he tried to rise. "Stop!" Anime begged as they dragged her toward a waiting wagon. "He was helping us." "Please, you don't understand." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The soldiers efficiently loaded her into the wagon, where other captured women and children huddled together. Little Eagle's cries grew fainter as the soldier carried him to a different wagon through tears. Anime watched the destruction of the camp that had become her sanctuary. Smoke rose from scattered cooking fires, kicked apart by horses' hooves. The carefully constructed wickiups lay broken and trampled. Women wept as they were separated from their families, while warriors who resisted were struck down or bound like Newall. From her position in the wagon, she could see Newall struggling. Against his bonds, his face a mask of blood and anguish. Their eyes met across the chaos, and she saw all his pain and rage and helplessness reflected there. This proud man who had shown her such kindness, who had cradled her son with such tenderness, now lay beaten in the mud of his own camp. "Please." She tried one last time, addressing the soldier guarding the wagon. "My son needs medicine. He's been sick." The Apache healer was treating him. "Save your breath, ma'am," the soldier replied coldly. "You're lucky we found you before these savages could do worse. The boy will be tended to at the fort." Anime wanted to scream at the bitter irony. These men, who claimed to be her rescuers, had just destroyed the only place where she and Little Eagle had found true acceptance and care. She thought of the cavalry officer who had abandoned them, wondering if he was among these soldiers, if he even knew or cared about the son he had left behind. The wagon lurched forward as the soldiers began their withdrawal. Around them, the camp lay in ruins. Some wickiups burned, sending columns of black smoke into the dawn sky. The Apache people who had shown her such kindness were scattered like leaves in a storm, their community shattered in mere minutes of violence. The last thing Anime saw as the wagon rolled away was Newall being hauled to his feet by 2 soldiers. Despite his bonds and injuries, he stood tall, his dignity unbroken. Even now, he tried to turn toward the wagon that carried Little Eagle, as if his warrior's heart would not let him abandon his promise to protect the child. The wagon crested a small rise, and the destroyed camp disappeared from view. Anna May slumped against the rough wooden side, her tears flowing freely now. Little Eagle's cries had faded to hiccuping sobs somewhere ahead, each sound piercing her heart like a knife. The other captured women murmured prayers in Apache, their voices a soft counterpoint to the soldiers' harsh commands and the continuing thunder of hooves. Dawn broke fully over the valley, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to mock the violence below. The wagon train moved steadily toward Fort Carson, carrying its captured prisoners away from the smoking ruins of their homes. With every jolting step of the horses, Anna May felt the distance growing between her and the man who had become her protector, her friend, and perhaps something more. She clutched the small carved eagle's feather that still hung from her dress, the only piece of narwhal she had left, and prayed for strength. Somewhere ahead, her son needed her. Somehow, she would find a way to make these soldiers understand the truth. But for now, all she could do was endure, holding on to the memory of Nawal's courage and kindness like a flame against the darkness. The wagon wheels clattered over rocks and ruts, each jolt sending waves of pain through Anna May's exhausted body. Little Eagle whimpered in her arms, his tiny fingers clutching at her dress. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as the military convoy wound its way toward Fort Carson. "Hush now, precious one," she whispered, rocking him gently. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Her voice trembled as she recited the familiar psalm, trying to draw strength from the words. "Would you listen to that?" One of the younger soldiers sneered, riding alongside the wagon, praying over that half-breed like its proper folk. His companion laughed, a harsh sound that made Anna May pull Little Eagle closer. "Reckon she's gone native," the second soldier called back. "Living with them savages, probably some squaw bride now." The cruel words carried to the other soldiers, drawing more laughter. Anna May lifted her chin, continuing her prayer louder. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." The words caught in her throat as the wagon hit another bump, but she forced herself to continue. Little Eagle needed to hear her voice, needed to know she was still here. From another wagon ahead, she caught glimpses of Nawal. The proud warrior sat straight despite his bonds, blood dried on his face from the blow he had taken. Even now, he radiated dignity, refusing to show weakness before his captors. His eyes constantly scanned the convoy, tracking both Little Eagles' wagon and Anna May's position. The day dragged on endlessly. The soldiers stopped only briefly to water the horses, refusing to let their prisoners down from the wagons. Anna May's throat burned with thirst, but she saved the few precious drops they were given for Little Eagle. The baby's fever seemed to be rising again without the Apache healer's medicines. "Please," she called to a passing soldier who looked barely older than 18. "My baby needs water." The young man hesitated, his canteen half raised, but a sharp word from his sergeant made him hurry past. Anna May slumped back against the wagon's wooden side, tears mixing with the dust on her face, as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. The convoy finally halted for the night. The soldiers efficiently set up their camp, posting guards at regular intervals. The prisoners were pulled from the wagons, their ankles bound with rope before being tied to posts driven into the ground. They placed Anna May near one of the campfires, probably to keep better watch on her. Little Eagle had finally fallen into an uneasy sleep, but his skin felt too warm against her chest. Across the flames, she could see Nawal tied to another post, his face illuminated by the dancing firelight. The night grew deeper. Soldiers talked and laughed around their fires, passing bottles and playing cards. Some cast suspicious glances at their prisoners, but most ignored them, confident in their bonds and guards. When the noise of the camp had died down to scattered snores and the crackle of dying fires, Nawal's voice carried softly across the flames to Anna May. "How is Little Eagle?" His English was careful, deliberate. "Fevered again," she whispered back, her heart aching at the concern in his voice. "Without the medicine, listen carefully," Nawal interrupted, his voice barely audible above the fire's pop and hiss. "I will not let them take him from you. Whatever comes at the fort, I swear this." Anna May felt tears spring to her eyes at his words. This man, who had already lost so much, was still willing to risk everything for her child. "Nawal," she breathed, "they'll kill you if you try anything. I can't bear more blood shed over us." "A warrior's life means nothing without honor," he replied. "Your son, Little Eagle, he carries 2 bloods, 2 spirits. He must live to carry them with pride." "Yes," Anna May said fiercely, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "Even if they kill me, he must live. He must know both sides of his heritage, must learn there can be love between our peoples." She touched the carved eagle feather that still hung from her dress. "You've shown us that." Through the flames, she saw Nawal nod solemnly. "Then we are agreed. Whatever comes, the child's life and dignity come first." His dark eyes reflected the firelight as he added softly, "You have become my people too, Anna May Walker. You and Little Eagle both." The words settled into her heart like a warm blanket against the cold night. She was no longer alone, no longer simply a cast-off woman with a mixed-blood child. Somehow, in the midst of loss and pain, she had found something precious, a family bound not by blood, but by choice and love. "Sleep now," Nawal murmured as Little Eagle stirred restlessly. "Save your strength. Tomorrow will bring its own trials." Anna May nodded, cradling her son closer. Despite her bonds and the hard ground beneath her, she felt a peculiar peace. Their whispered pact across the flames had given her new strength. Whatever waited for them at Fort Carson, they would face it together, united in their determination to protect Little Eagle and the hope he represented. The fire burned lower, its embers glowing like fallen stars. Around them, the guards continued their patrol, unaware of the bond that had been forged in whispers and firelight. Anna May pressed a gentle kiss to Little Eagle's forehead. Her prayers, now holding both her son and the warrior who had become his protector. In the darkness, Nawal began to hum softly, a melody she recognized from the Apache camp, a song of protection and strength. Anna May closed her eyes, letting the quiet tune wash over her. As Little Eagle finally settled into deeper sleep, she joined in with her own whispered hymn, their different songs weaving together in the night air like smoke from the dying fire. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fort Carson's weathered walls as the military convoy approached. Word of their arrival had spread quickly through the settlement, drawing curious onlookers who now lined the dusty road leading to the gates. Women in cotton dresses whispered behind raised hands while children darted between adults, straining for a glimpse of the prisoners. The wagons creaked to a halt before the fort's heavy wooden gates. Anna May clutched Little Eagle tighter, her heart pounding as soldiers roughly hauled her down from the wagon. Her legs, stiff from the long journey, nearly buckled beneath her. The baby whimpered, sensing her tension. Captain Elias Harding sat straight-backed on his horse, surveying the growing crowd with cold satisfaction. His uniform gleamed despite the trail dust, brass buttons catching the sunlight as he wheeled his mount closer to where Anna May stood. "Good people of Fort Carson," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Behold the rescue of one of our own, stolen away by savage raiders." He gestured dramatically toward Anna May and Little Eagle. The crowd pressed closer, their faces a mix of sympathy and suspicion. Anna May saw familiar faces among them, women she had known from church services, traders who had passed through. The fort, their eyes now held questions, judgment. That ain't true. The words burst from Anna May before she could stop them. Her voice rang clear across the sudden hush. I went to them seeking help. My baby was dying. Captain Harding's face darkened. The woman is confused, addled by her ordeal. No? Anna May stepped forward, despite the restraining hand of a nearby soldier. Nawal and his people saved us. Both. They showed mercy when others, her eyes fixed pointedly on the captain, showed only cruelty. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several townsfolk exchanged troubled glances. Near the back, Anna May spotted Reverend Thomas watching intently. His weathered face creased with concern. 2 soldiers dragged Nawal forward then. Despite his chains and the dried blood on his face, he stood tall, his dignity undiminished. His dark eyes met Anna May's briefly, filled with quiet strength. This savage, Captain Harding spat, pointing at Nawal. We'll face justice for kidnapping and other crimes against settlement folk. He's committed no crime. Anna May's voice cracked with emotion. He protected my child when others would have let him die. A sharp gesture from the captain cut her off as soldiers moved to restrain her. Little Eagle began to wail, his cries piercing the tense air. Several women in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, maternal instincts warring with ingrained prejudices. Anna May saw one older woman cross herself, while another whispered something that made her companion frown and shake her head. Take them to the stockade, Captain Harding ordered, his voice tight with barely contained rage. Separate cells. No, please. Anna May struggled as soldiers moved to take Little Eagle. He needs me. He's still sick. The child stays with his mother. A new voice rang out. Reverend Thomas stepped forward, his plain black coat dusty from the road. Captain, surely Christian mercy demands at least this much. The captain's jaw clenched, but even he hesitated to publicly deny a man of God. After a long moment, he jerked his head in reluctant assent. The woman and child together then, but the savage stays chained alone. Anna May watched helplessly. As soldiers led Nawal away, his chains clanking with each dignified step. His back remained straight, refusing to bow even as jeers rose from several younger soldiers. The stockade air was thick with the smell of old, straw, and darker things. Their cell, though small, at least had a narrow window that let in strips of fading daylight. A thin blanket lay crumpled in one corner, their only concession to comfort. Little Eagle's cries echoed off the wooden walls, each sob tearing at Anna May's heart. She paced the small space, bouncing him gently while humming fragments of hymns. From somewhere nearby, she could hear the heavy tread of guards and, more distantly, the sounds of the fort settling into evening routine. "Hush now, little one," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she began to sing properly. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The familiar words steadied her, and gradually Little Eagle's sobs quieted to hiccuping breaths. She continued singing, her clear voice carrying through the stockade's thick walls. Other prisoners fell silent, listening. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. As darkness crept into their cell, Anna May sank down onto the straw, still cradling her son. Little Eagle finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, one tiny hand clutching her dress. She touched the eagle feather that still hung around her neck, Nawal's gift, a symbol of protection and hope, through the window. She could hear the muted sounds of the fort at night, guards calling changes, distant laughter from the soldiers. Quarters, the lonely howl of a coyote beyond the walls. Somewhere in another cell, Nawal too would be hearing these sounds, perhaps thinking of his people scattered into the wilderness by the raid. She remembered his words from their fireside. Oath, whatever comes, the child's life and dignity come first. Their shared promise gave her strength now, helping her resist despair. The truth she had spoken at the gates might have fallen on mostly deaf ears, but she had seen doubt in some faces. Seeds had been planted. Little Eagle stirred in his sleep, making small sounds of distress. Anna May resumed her quiet singing, her voice barely above a whisper now, through many dangers. Toils and snares, I have already come. The night deepened around them as mother and child huddled together in their cell, her soft song a defiant thread of hope in the darkness. The stockade's wooden walls creaked in the night wind. Moonlight filtered through the narrow windows, casting pale strips across the dirt floor. In her cell, Anna May sat with her back against the rough wall. Little Eagle nestled against her chest. The baby's breath came soft and steady now, though his forehead still felt warm to her touch. Through the thin wall separating their cells, she heard Noel's deep voice, barely above a whisper. The stars still watch, even when we cannot see them. Anna May shifted closer to the wall, drawing comfort from his presence. My mother always said, God's eyes never close, even in the darkest night. Your God and our Great Spirit, Noel replied, thoughtfully. Perhaps they are like two eagles circling the same mountain. The quiet understanding in his voice brought tears to Anna May's eyes. She remembered the scripture that had sustained her through so many trials. The Lord is my light and my salvation, she recited softly. Whom shall I fear? Good words, Noel answered. They remind me of my grandfather's teachings. He was a medicine man who saw visions of peace between our peoples. A guard's boot scraped against stone somewhere down the corridor. Both prisoners fell silent until the footsteps faded. Tell me about your grandfather's visions, Anna May whispered when it was safe. He saw a time when children of all nations would play together under the same sun, Nawal said, his voice rich with memory. When wisdom would flow like water between camps, and the blood of hatred would sink into the earth, forgotten. Little Eagle stirred, making small sounds in his sleep. Anna May hummed softly until he settled again. My grandfather said the path to this future would be marked by great suffering. Nawal continued, but also by brave hearts who dared to love across the boundaries others built. Outside the stockade walls, the town of Fort Carson lay restless under the stars. On the boardwalk near the general store, Martha Wilkins spoke in hushed tones with Sarah Cooper as they walked home from a late church meeting. Did you see how that woman stood up to the captain? Martha whispered. Straight-backed as any soldier, with her baby in her arms. Sarah nodded, clutching her shawl against the night chill. And the way she spoke of the Indian Nawal, she called him, said he saved her child when others wouldn't. Makes a body wonder what really happened out there, Martha mused. That baby looked well cared for, not like he'd been through any ordeal. Their words carried on the night breeze, joining other whispered conversations throughout the settlement. At the saloon, younger soldiers boasted loudly of tomorrow's justice, their voices harsh with whiskey and bravado. Make an example. That's what the captain says, one declared, pounding his fist on the scarred wooden bar. Show them savages what happens when they take our women. But she said she went willing. An older soldier muttered into his cup. And that baby? There's something not right about how the captain questioning orders, Jenkins. The sharp challenge silenced further debate in his small parsonage beside the church. Reverend Thomas paced before the fireplace, his Bible open on the desk, verses about Mercy Ward with his duty to maintain order in the settlement. The faces of Anna May and her child haunted him, along with the quiet dignity of the Apache warrior who had protected them. What profit is it, he murmured, quoting scripture, if we gain the whole territory but lose our own souls? Back in the stockade, Anna May pressed her palm against the wall, imagining she could feel Noel's strength flowing through the rough. Boards, I'm afraid, she admitted softly. Not for myself, but for Little Eagle. What will become of him if do not speak of endings? Nowell interrupted gently. The night is for gathering courage, like my people gather sweet berries in summer. Each prayer, each memory of love, these are the fruits that will sustain us. Anna May closed her eyes, remembering her mother's lessons. "The Lord is my shepherd," she whispered. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Good, Nahwal encouraged. Let the words fill you like breath fills the body. As Anna May continued the psalm, Nahwal's deep voice joined in with a traditional prayer of his people. The two songs, twined together in the darkness, different words speaking the same hope, different paths leading to the same truth. Little Eagle slept on, one tiny hand clutching the eagle feather that still hung around his mother's neck. In his dreams, perhaps he heard both voices and knew no difference between them, just as he knew no difference between the blood of his mother and the love of the warrior who had become his second father. Through the long hours until dawn, Anna May and Nahwal continued their quiet exchange of prayers and memories. Each word seemed to weave a blanket of strength around them, preparing their hearts for whatever the morning might bring. From his window, Reverend Thomas watched the moon set behind the fort's walls. His Bible lay open to the Gospel of Matthew. "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." With trembling fingers, he reached for paper and pen, knowing sleep would not come until he had written what must be said when dawn arrived. The night deepened toward morning. Guards changed shifts, their boots scraping against stone. Coyotes called from the distant hills, perhaps the same ones who had witnessed Anna May's first desperate arrival at the Apache camp, that cold day that seemed so long ago now. In their cells, both prisoners felt the weight of approaching dawn. Yet their voices remained steady, continuing to share the stories and prayers that had shaped their separate paths to this shared moment. "Tell me again," Anna May whispered, "about your grandfather's vision of peace." And as the stars began to fade, Nahwal's voice carried her through one more hour of darkness. Speaking of hope that would outlast any single night of fear, dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of pale gold and rose. The fort's flagpole cast a long shadow across the packed dirt of the parade ground. Frost still glazed the wooden buildings, making them glitter like distant mountains in the early light. Two soldiers marched Anna May from her cell. Little Eagle bundled tight against her chest. The child whimpered softly, sensing his mother's tension. 4 more guards escorted Nahwal, chains rattling with each of his measured steps. Despite his bonds and the bruises darkening his face, the Apache warrior walked tall, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Already a crowd had gathered, merchants opening their shops, women carrying baskets of fresh bread, children running ahead of their parents. They pressed close to the wooden fence surrounding the parade ground, their breath making small clouds in the cold morning air. Captain Harding stood on the raised platform usually used for announcements and ceremonies. His brass buttons gleamed in the sunrise, his posture rigid as iron. Behind him, the American flag snapped in the sharp morning breeze. "Bring the prisoners forward," he commanded, his voice carrying across the growing crowd. The soldiers pushed Anna May and Nahwal to the front of the platform. Little Eagle began to cry, his thin wails cutting through the murmuring of the onlookers. "Citizens of Fort Carson," Captain Harding proclaimed, pacing the platform's edge, "we gather to witness justice. This Apache warrior stands accused of harboring white women and he paused, his lip curling, their illegitimate offspring. Such actions cannot go unpunished." Anna May felt something rise in her chest, not fear now, but a fierce, burning certainty. She looked at the faces in the crowd, women holding their own children, old men leaning on canes, the preacher standing silent near the back. These were God's children too, just as the Apache who had saved her were his children. No. The word burst from her like a spring breaking through ice. She stepped forward, shrugging off the restraining hand of her guard. "Be silent," Captain Harding ordered, but Anna Mae's voice only grew stronger. "I will not be silent. God sees the truth, and so must you all." She turned to face the crowd, lifting little Eagle high in her arms. The morning sun caught his face, highlighting features that spoke of both his heritages. "Look at my son. Look at this child some would call shame or curse." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Women drew closer to the fence, their faces intent. "When my own people cast me out," Anna Mae continued, her voice carrying clear and strong, "when soldiers who claimed to serve justice turned their backs. It was Nawal who showed God's mercy. He and his people took us in, healed my sick child, gave us shelter when we had none." This woman is confused. Captain Harding cut in sharply. "Clearly the savage has. I am not confused." Anna Mae's declaration rang across the parade ground. "I know exactly what I speak. This man," she gestured to Nawal, "this warrior you would condemn, he paced through cold nights holding my fevered child. He shared his people's food when we were starving. He showed more Christian charity than those who wear the cross." The crowd's whispers grew louder. Martha Wilkins pressed forward, her hand clutched to her throat. Sarah Cooper stood beside her, nodding slowly. "This child is neither curse nor shame," Anna Mae proclaimed, cradling little Eagle close again. "He is a promise of what tomorrow could be if we choose mercy over hatred, understanding over fear. In his veins runs the blood of two peoples. In his future lies the hope of a better way." Nawal stood motionless, but his eyes shone with fierce pride as he watched Anna Mae speak. The chains on his wrists seemed to matter less with each word she uttered. "Look at your children," Anna Mae urged the crowd, her voice softening. "Look at their innocent faces and tell me, would Christ himself turn away a baby in need? Would he close his heart because of the blood in a child's veins?" Women in the crowd began to press closer, some with tears on their cheeks. Several men removed their hats, their expressions troubled. "This is sedition." Captain Harding's face had reddened. "Guards, remove her." But as the soldiers stepped forward, something remarkable happened. Martha Wilkins pushed through the fence gate and strode onto the parade ground. She planted herself firmly between the guards and Anna Mae. "No," Martha said, her voice quavering. But determined, the woman speaks truth. "I've seen how you treat the mixed-blood children, Captain. Seen how you turn your back on their mothers. Where is your Christian charity?" Sarah Cooper joined her friend, and then others, women with determined faces, men with thoughtful frowns, even children slipping past their parents to cluster around Anna Mae and little Eagle. "The good book says, 'Suffer the little children to come unto me,'" Martha quoted, staring straight at Captain Harding. "It don't say nothing about whose children they are." The crowd's murmuring grew louder, more insistent. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the frost-rimed buildings and casting long shadows across the parade ground where justice and mercy now stood in balance. The morning sun climbed higher over Fort Carson's parade ground as the crowd pressed closer, their voices rising in support of Anna Mae's bold declaration. Captain Harding's face had darkened to a dangerous shade of red, his knuckles white on his sword hilt. Nawal watched the scene unfold, his expression calm despite the iron chains binding his wrists. The metal clinked softly as he shifted his weight, drawing all eyes to his towering figure. With deliberate slowness, he reached down to his waist where the soldiers had missed a small hunting knife concealed in his belt. Several soldiers raised their rifles, but Nawal's movements remained peaceful. He drew the knife, his last weapon, passed down through generations of his people, and held it up so it caught the sunlight. The blade gleamed, its bone handle worn smooth from years of use. Then, with grace that belied his chains, Nawal knelt before Captain Harding. The crowd fell silent, watching as the proud Apache warrior placed his ancestral knife at the captain's polished boots. "I seek no blood," Noel's deep voice carried across the hushed parade ground. "The path of vengeance brings only more tears to mother's eyes." He glanced at Little Eagle, still cradled in Anna Mae's arms. "That child carries hope in his heart, hope for both our peoples. I choose peace for his tomorrow." Martha Wilkins pressed her handkerchief to her eyes, and other women in the crowd began to weep openly. Even some of the soldiers shifted uncomfortably, their rifles drooping toward the ground. Fine words from a savage Captain Harding spat, but his voice held a note of uncertainty. The crowd's mood had shifted dangerously against him. From the back of the gathering, a figure in black moved forward. The Reverend Thomas stepped through the parting crowd, his Bible clutched in weathered hands. The preacher had remained silent until now, watching and weighing what he witnessed. "Captain," the Reverend's voice rang clear in the morning air, "I am reminded of our Lord's words in Matthew chapter 5. Verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." He gestured toward Nawal, still, kneeling in the dust. "Before us kneels a man who chooses peace when he could justify vengeance, who shows mercy when he has known only cruelty from us." The Reverend turned to face the crowd, his voice strengthening. "And here stands a mother who found God's love in the most unexpected place among those we were taught to fear. Are we not all God's children? Does not Christ's blood cover all nations and peoples?" More townspeople pushed through the fort's gates, drawn by the commotion. Sarah Cooper's husband, the blacksmith, stepped forward with his massive arms crossed. "The preacher speaks sense, Captain. Ain't right to punish folks for showing Christian charity, even if they ain't Christian themselves." Captain Harding's jaw worked as he surveyed the scene. The crowd had grown to nearly 100 people, their faces set in stubborn determination. His own soldiers looked increasingly uncertain, several lowering their weapons completely. "This is military justice," Harding tried one last time, but his words rang hollow in the face of such united opposition. Martha Wilkins stepped closer to the platform, her gray head held high. "Military justice, is it? Then explain to us why you cast out Anna Mae and her babe in the first place. Was that justice too?" A rumble of agreement passed through the crowd. More women pressed forward, their faces hard with maternal fury. Some held their own babies, clutched protective to their breasts. Captain Harding's hand tightened on his sword hilt, but he was no fool. He could see the mood of the crowd balanced on a knife's edge. If he gave the order to arrest or harm the prisoners now, he risked open revolt, not just from the townspeople, but possibly from his own men. "The army doesn't brook interference in military matters," he growled, but his tone had lost its certainty. Then perhaps the Reverend Thomas said quietly, "We should send word to your superiors asking them to explain why a mother and sick child were driven from the fort's protection. I'm sure the governor would be most interested in such military matters." The threat hung in the air like gunsmoke. Captain Harding's face worked through several shades of purple as he weighed his options. The morning sun beat down on the tense scene, highlighting the sweat beading on his forehead. Finally, with a curse barely concealed behind his mustache, he turned to the nearest sergeant. "Release the prisoners," he snapped. "But mark my words, any further trouble from either of them will be dealt with harshly." The sergeant hurried to unlock Nawal's chains while the crowd broke into relieved murmurs. As the iron fell away, Nawal rose to his full height, rubbing his chafed wrists. He made no move to retrieve his knife from the captain's feet. "Thank you," Anna Mae said clearly, holding Little Eagle close. The baby had fallen asleep despite the tension. One tiny hand curled against his mother's shawl. Captain Harding turned on his heel and stalked away, his boot heels striking the wooden platform like angry punctuation marks. The crowd began to disperse, though many lingered to watch Nawal and Anna May with wondering eyes. Martha Wilkins approached them, her weathered face kind. "You'll need somewhere to stay, I expect. My house has room enough, if you've a mind to accept." Before Anna May could respond, Sarah Cooper stepped forward. "We've space too, above the smithy. Warm in winter, and my Thomas could use a strong hand in the forge." She smiled hesitantly at Nawal. "If you've a mind to learn smithing, that is." Nawal inclined his head gravely. "I would be honored to learn such work." His dark eyes met Anna May's, and something passed between them, a shared understanding that this moment marked not an ending, but a beginning. The morning sun climbed higher still, warming the frost from the buildings and casting their shadows shorter and shorter. Where hatred had threatened to triumph, mercy had bloomed instead, as fresh and unexpected as spring flowers pushing through winter's last snow. The widow Margaret Avery's ranch house glowed like a beacon in the gathering dusk. Inside, the stone fireplace crackled with warmth, casting dancing shadows on whitewashed walls. The aroma of fresh-baked bread and hearty beef stew filled the small kitchen. Anna May sat in a cushioned rocker by the hearth, Little Eagle nestled against her shoulder. Her fingers traced gentle circles on his back as he dozed, his fever finally gone. The simple cotton dress Margaret had given her felt strange after weeks in her trail-worn clothes, but clean and welcome. Across the table, Nawal eased himself into a straight-backed chair, wincing slightly. Purple bruises still marked his face where the rifle had struck him, but his eyes held peace instead of pain. Margaret set a third bowl of stew before him, steam rising in the lamplight. "Eat up now," Margaret urged, her weathered hands smoothing her apron. "Both of you need your strength back." They shared the meal in comfortable quiet, broken only by the clink of spoons and Little Eagle's soft breathing. Anna May found herself watching Nawal's hands, so fierce in battle, yet now so gentle as he broke his bread. Those same hands had cradled her child, had lifted her from despair. Lamplight pooled golden on the tablecloth as evening deepened outside. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. Anna May felt tears well up, not from fear this time, but from the simple rightness of this moment. "We are family now, aren't we?" she whispered, her voice trembling with hope. Nawal looked up, his dark eyes glistening in the warm light. He nodded slowly, a tear tracking down his cheek. No words were needed. The truth of it filled the room like a blessing. Spring painted the valley in fresh greens and golds, the winter's harsh memories melting away like the last patches of snow. On the edge of Apache territory, a small homestead took root, a place where two worlds met in peace. Anna May gathered children beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree, their voices rising in hymns that drifted across the meadow. Both settler and Apache children sat together, tracing letters in the dirt as she taught them to read. Nearby, Nawal worked alongside neighboring farmers, sharing ancient wisdom about the land while learning new ways to make it flourish. As evening settled, lamplight warmed their humble cabin. Little Eagle slept contentedly in Nawal's strong arms, his tiny fingers curled around his father's thumb. Anna May watched them, remembering that desperate night on the trail. "Please, don't look under the blanket," she whispered, echoing her first words to him. Nawal's eyes crinkled with warmth. "Looking saved us all," he replied softly. Together, they gazed at their sleeping child, living proof that love could bridge any divide. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.